Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Virtual Family Day, which is going to be all about how people used to dress in the Georgian period. And you've probably already noticed that this week is really exciting because we have a special guest, which is Miss Polly Hewson, who's one of the people who was living with Benjamin Franklin at 36 Craven Street. And she's going to be talking to you in a moment all about the clothes she's wearing and also her daily routine for getting dressed. And she'll be asking you questions and you can ask her questions too. So again, I'm noticing some familiar names, but I'll just run through those ways you can ask questions. So remember, if you click your mouse or tap your screen, you see those icons, and there's a raise hand button, and if you click that, then I can unmute your audio and you can speak directly with Miss Polly Hewson. Otherwise, you can use your Q&A button, which is like two speech bubbles, and if you click that, you can type in your question and I'll read it out. And you can also ask questions over the comments or just give us your feedback on there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, because we are recording today's lesson, then you can put questions or comments in the comments, and always get in touch with me at education@benjaminfranklinhouse.org via email. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Miss Polly Hewson.
Good afternoon. My name is Polly, Mrs. Polly Hewson to be exact, and this is my mother's house. And I'm sure someone can tell me the name of the very important man who lives here with us on the first floor.
Okay, so I can see two raised hands. I'm going to go to Jessica first, Enid, sorry, first.
Benjamin Franklin.
Thank you, Enid. Did you hear that, Miss Polly Hewson?
I did indeed, and that is exactly right. Thank you, Jessica. But I understand that today you are here to learn about my style of dress. Have I got that right? Yes? Marvellous. Well, in that case, I shall start off by assuring you that I always follow the latest fashions, and my garments are made from the finest pattern silk and lace trim. But the top layer is definitely not all I need to worry about. Oh no, there's lots and lots of garments underneath this, which take me a lot of time to put on in the morning. So much time, in fact, that I have to get a servant girl to come and help me. Shall I tell you the order in which she does this? Yes? All right, well then. She starts by helping me to pull up my stockings, and then she laces up my leather shoes. Do you put your shoes on first of all when you get dressed?
I can see another raised hand, Alvina, so I'm going to unmute that microphone. So Miss Polly Hewson's question was whether you put your shoes on first as well, because that's what she does in her morning routine. So I'm just asking to unmute if you'd still like to answer the question. I can see your raised hand.
I don't put my shoes on first. I put my clothes on first.
Ah, so when do you put your shoes on?
I put my shoes on after I put my clothes on.
Oh my, how very strange. I suppose if I were to do that, I wouldn't be able to find my feet, the amount of clothes I put on. Right, so that was my legs. And then after my stockings and shoes have been put on, comes my stays. Now, this is a very heavy piece of linen with pieces of bone inside, which is tied tightly at the back. Now, this might sound uncomfortable, but I'm used to it, you see, and it has the wonderful benefit of making me sit and stand straight as a rod. After my stays, we go to the waist, and then a pocket is tied around it. Now, this is it's a little bag or pouch that I can keep small things like handkerchiefs in. Now, my mother taught me to embroider from when I was very young, so I like to embroider little designs on mine. After the pocket, we have something else which goes around the waist, the petticoat. Now, if I just stand up, I'm sure you can see my petticoat here, in between the pink bits of my gown. That's the petticoat. And it looks like a skirt, and it's what gives my dress its lovely, lovely shape. And it must contain some openings so that I can access my pocket underneath. Now, I mentioned my gown, and this is what goes on next, all right? So, as you can see, it's just the outer bit here. And I always, always try to get lace ruffles on my sleeve and at the front. It is also open at the top and at the bottom so that my petticoat can come through. Now, after the gown, we move on to the final piece of the outfit, which is the stomacher. Now, that comes just here and it covers my stays. I have a variety of different ones, and each one makes the dress look entirely different. So that's my outfit, and then we move on to a very important part of my getting ready in the morning, my hair. Now, who thinks that this is my real hair?
Okay, so I can see a hand up from Jessica, so I'm going to, from Enid, sorry Enid, so I'm going to unmute your microphone.
No, I don't think that it's real hair.
Thank you.
Well,
and in the chat as well, we have a no from Daria too.
all right, so we have a yes and a no, and I can tell you that you are both actually correct. Some of it is my real hair and some of it isn't. My servant girl helps me every morning to sort of put hair pieces in amongst my real hair, and then we powder it and puff it up to give it this lovely height and the grey colour. It's called my coiffure. Sometimes I even put ribbons in it on special occasions. Interestingly though, men do wear wigs, although not Dr. Franklin, for his tastes are rather more modest than that. All right, I think that's everything. So now that I have shared with you the secrets of my boudoir, do you have any questions for me about it, or about life with living with Franklin in general?
Well, I can see a couple of hands up, so I'm going to go to Albina first and unmute your microphone if you'd like to ask a question. So I can see your hand still up, so I'll just ask to unmute again in case you'd like to answer your question.
I didn't have any questions.
Oh, don't worry, that's fine. Thank you though. Okay, so I can see Enid has a question now.
It seems like there's a small braid in the back. What is that? It kind of drapes over your shoulder. What is it?
Well, this is exactly what I was talking about one of those extra pieces of hair that we put in. So, all right, most of this, well, some of it is my real hair, and this bit is something I've added on for today.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your questions, and I'm sure you'll all join me in saying a big thank you to Miss Polly Hewson for joining us, and to bid her farewell, because I'm afraid she has to return to 1774 now. She's got a lot of things to be getting on with.
I do indeed. It's been lovely though, children. All right, goodbye now. Do I just press the little, is it leave? Do I just press that little?
Yes, Miss Polly Hewson.
All right, okay. All right, goodbye now, goodbye.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for your participation, your questions. I'm now going to just share some slides with you so I can tell you a bit more about Georgian fashion, and then I've got some activities for you to do with me, and then some ideas for some things you could do at home as well. So hopefully you can see my slides now. So actually I can't see you anymore, so I'm just there we go. Okay, right, so I can see you now. So now let's think about why we've called this family day Dress Like a Georgian. So we call the period, the 18th century in England, the Georgian period. And that's really because the country was ruled by 3 King Georges. We had King George I, George II, and George III. Now, Benjamin Franklin arrived in London to live at 36 Craven Street, which we call Benjamin Franklin House today, in 1757, so kind of in the middle of the century. And at that point, it was King George II who was on the throne. But not many years later, in 1760, George III became king. They had his coronation. And so he was the king when there would eventually be the War of Independence, the Revolutionary War between England and America, when America broke away and became independent. So today we're going to be thinking about Georgian fashion in general. Miss Polly Hewson's also already told us a lot, but we'll give you a few more details, and thinking about her fashion and Franklin's fashion in particular as well. So on the screen now, you can see some different types of Georgian dress. So about a century before the Georgian period, the king in England was called James I, and he got rid of something called the sumptuary laws. And these laws had tried to stop people from spending lots of money on personal products, so things like clothing and also food. Now, once these had been got rid of, that meant that people could start to spend much, much more on things like fashion and food and drink. So that's what was happening in the 18th century. However, there was still a big difference between what the very richest could afford and what the poorest could afford. So on your screen, you can see for both men and women a kind of progression from, on the left, you have the very upper class Georgians, and then middle class in the middle, and then the lower classes on the right. And if you look from left to right, you should be able to see that the clothes they're wearing, they use less material as we go to the right. They're using less decorated, less rich and expensive materials, and there's less pattern and kind of flair in them as we go to the right. Now, before the Georgian period, most people were either very, very rich or very, very poor. But in the 18th century, in England at least, there was this real growth in something called the middle classes. So if we look at the gentleman and gentlewoman in the middle, around there, and this is the class that Benjamin Franklin and Margaret and Polly and her mother Margaret would really have been in. But we know that Benjamin Franklin was a really important person, so he would have also been mixing with lots of people in the upper classes as well, like we can see on the left of the screen. So, I wonder if you can tell me how we find out about fashion. So we're thinking about fashion throughout history, and today we're going to be like historians. Normally we're acting like scientists, like Ben Franklin, but today we're going to be putting our historian hat on. And I wonder if anyone can think of some different ways that historians can find out about what people wore in the past and how they wore it. Has anyone got any ideas of how people found those things out? So I can see a comment from Dara that says writings. Very good. Exactly. That is one of the ways I'm going to show you. And I can see Enid has a hand up.
Maybe writing?
Yeah, writing. And when you say writing, can you give some examples of what that writing might be?
Letters?
Yeah.
People like fashion designers writing letters to other people or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Or even ordinary people might write to tell a friend about the new material they bought for their new dress or what they'd worn to a special party. Really good, thank you. So that's really good. You both mentioned writing. So there's a couple of other ways we can think about. So first of all, we've got portraits. So here we have a portrait of our Ben Franklin. So often the portraits of the time might be quite important people, but there would also be paintings of scenes that would include all sorts of classes. So they're a really good place to find out about what people used to wear and how they would wear it. Another thing that historians can use is artifacts. So these are objects like the actual clothes themselves that might have survived. And here on the screen, we've got a beautiful artifact. This is from the Victoria and Albert Museum here in London. And this very large, wide dress, that's called a mantua dress. And so those upper classes would have worn these. You can see it's got beautiful gold decoration on it. And you can imagine that the women that would wear these dresses might have to kind of turn sideways to be able to get through the doorways. They were so wide. And then, just like you both mentioned, writings are a really important way as well. So old documents, they might be letters, they might be magazines or newspapers from the time. Also books that are written at the time and describe characters are really important too. So great historian work there. Let's turn now to look a bit more closely at Franklin's fashion, and we'll come back to Polly as well at the end. So, as we saw on the last slide and here too, Ben Franklin normally wore quite simple clothes in fairly plain colours like brown and grey, like we can see here. And he didn't usually wear a wig. And if he wore a hat, it would normally be quite a simple one. So I've used this image lots of times in the classes. It's one of my favourite ones, the one in the middle, which is when he was in the court of France. Maybe you can see in his hand by his side, he's holding his hat in his hand. So Franklin really did wear quite simple clothes, even when he went to really important occasions and met very important individuals. So that, again, that image in the middle is at the French court. On the sofa on the right, we have Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. And you can see that Franklin's clothes are very different to everyone else around him. Everyone around him has very fancy clothes and is wearing wigs and feathers in their hair and jewels as well. And France really was a centre for fashion. In many ways, it still is today. In the 18th century, that was really somewhere that other people would look to get their fashions. But Franklin did become himself a kind of fashion icon. The French were very taken with his kind of rustic, simple way of dressing, and some of the French courtiers would copy him as well. So in the daytime, middle-class gentlemen would wear an outfit quite like the one that we can see in the middle that Franklin's wearing. So a tightly fitting jacket with tails, and then a waistcoat under that, and probably a cravat that he would have tucked into that. You can maybe see that more clearly in the image on the left. It's almost like a little scarf that he's tucked in. And then on his legs, he probably would have worn these breeches, which are like these long shorts that go under the knee. But for formal events, middle-class men would sometimes have worn these powdered wigs, like Miss Polly Hewson was talking about too, and grander clothes with more decorative detail and trimmings. Franklin, we think, would have worn those occasionally, like we can see in the portrait on the right, which was actually painted during his time when he was living in London. And finally, let's come back to Miss Polly Hewson as well. So Polly gave you a very in detail description of how she would get dressed in the morning, but let's have a think about how she related to the other kinds of dresses that women were wearing at the time. So over that 18th century, dresses were getting more and more elaborate, hairstyles were getting higher and higher. And as I said, France was a real trendsetter for fashion. So in the middle of the century, which is about the time that Ben Franklin came to live in London, these sackback gowns were really popular. You can see a picture of those on the top right of the screen, and they're like a smaller version of that big mantua dress we saw from the V&A. And they would have been really decorated and have very special patterns and maybe embroidery. And in the middle of the screen, we can see Polly wearing the outfit she wears in her famous portrait, which is on the left. And this was another popular style. So the dress had a kind of almost like an over jacket, and it was called a French jacket style, and would have a kind of quite square collar. And normally the sleeves would be just 3/4 length and with lace trim as well, like the dress that Polly was wearing just now. And so these drawings and the writings that you spoke about and these artifacts, they're what we call sources. So historians use those sources to find out about the past. And Polly did mention her coiffure, and you can see some examples of those in the pictures at the bottom, how those styles changed. And as she explained, quite high hairstyle was really in fashion, and that they would sometimes decorate that with ribbons or flowers, even birds on occasion, and they might even put a hat on top as well. So I hope that's given you a bit more information about fashion in the Georgian period, and also a bit of an explanation of what the Georgian period was. Certainly for the middle classes, they were often trying to copy those upper classes, and by showing that they followed the fashions, that was a display of how wealthy they were, and how cultured they were too. So I'm going to stop the presentation now, and I've got a task to get as a bit of a test to see how you were listening to Polly. But I wonder if anyone has any questions about anything I've just gone through. I have a question from Enid. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. My mom is wondering, how much did the dresses weigh?
That's a really good question. They would have been quite heavy, and we're going to be revising in a moment all of those layers that Polly had to put on, and remember the stays that she put on near the beginning, they would have bone in them, and those petticoats, so they would be quite heavy, especially that mantua dress, that really wide dress. So it would be quite uncomfortable for women to have to wear those big dresses. Really good question, thank you. Oh, sorry. Well, I'm going to be asking for more participation in a moment, because we're going to be seeing if you remember the order that Miss Polly Hewson had to get dressed in the morning. So I've got this kind of Georgian doll here, and some the different parts of her clothing. So I remember we were a bit taken aback, I think, because it's so different to what we do in modern times. Does anyone remember what Miss Polly Hewson would put on first when she was getting dressed? Very first of all. Ah, I can see in the comments that Daria has said shoes. You're quite right. So I'm going to take the shoes and put those on first. This is assuming she already has her stockings on. Okay, and does anyone remember what would come next after that? I just mentioned them, the piece of clothing that had the bone in it.
It's the purple one on the side.
You're right, it is the purple one, and they're called stays. It's a bit like a corset. Have you heard of a corset?
Yes.
Exactly. So she called them stays, but it's like a corset. So as she said, they're maybe a bit uncomfortable because remember there's bone. You can imagine that poking into you. But it was really important for keeping the right shape and also keeping them standing up straight. Very well done, Enid. Thank you. Okay, so that would go on next. Okay, and does anyone remember what came after that? Something that she would keep things in. How she would, because women wouldn't really carry handbags like they do today. Does anyone remember what came next for women to keep things in? Just checking the comments and the Q&A. I can see Enid's hand is up.
The pouch.
Yeah, the pouch. It's funny because she called it a pocket, and it's not exactly what we think of as pockets today, but it has the same idea. So it's a pouch. And she'd keep her precious things in there, maybe like her handkerchiefs, things she didn't want to be without. So that would go around her waist, tie it around her waist. Thank you, Enid. Okay, and then how about what would come next? So what would go on top of the pocket? And Miss Polly Hewson had to stand up to show you this, and she mentioned how there would have to be some openings in this so that she could reach through to her pocket and take out those precious possessions she might have put in there. What might come next? And it was also the thing that would give her gown its shape, so keep it that really beautiful big shape, and would add the heaviness that Enid was asking about too. Okay, so I can see Enid's hand is up.
Petticoat.
Petticoat, thank you, exactly. So here we have the petticoat. So that would go on top of the pocket. And then we're really nearly there now. What would go on next, Enid?
The gown?
Yeah, absolutely. you. And then if we just put the gown on, at the moment, we can still see her stays. So what's the last thing that needs to go on? Do you remember what it's called?
No, but I do see it.
You can see it, exactly. I wonder if anyone in the thank you very much, Enid, very well remembered with the order. Does anyone in the chat remember what this last bit was called that would go to cover the stays? Okay, it is quite hard. It's a name that we don't use anymore. It was called a stomacher. A stomacher. And remember, you could have different stomachers that you might mix and match with the same dresses to make them look different. Okay, she's now looking very smart, our Georgian lady, and so I'm going to give you some ideas now for some things, some crafts you could do at home inspired by this session. So for the crafts, really simple, you'll just need some coloured pencils and markers, and some paper, maybe some card. If you do have a printer, we have some resources that you can print off our website, but if you don't, you can always do your own drawings and designs inspired by what we've done today. So if you do have a printer, on the event page for Dress Like a Georgian, there are some links where you can download some things. So the first thing you can download is some paper dolls. I don't know if you've made these before. So we've got one for a Georgian lady and one for a Georgian gentleman. And I made one of these earlier, so I've got my Georgian lady, so I cut her out and coloured in parts of her outfit, and I've actually stuck her onto cards so that she's a bit stronger. And then I also coloured in the dresses and cut those out, and then you can fix them to the paper doll because they have these little paper tabs. I don't know if you can see those, that you can fold over, and then it will stay on your paper doll. And so we've got another very fashionable Georgian lady. So we have those that you can download. We also have some colouring pages. Now these are more the fashions, not so much of the English men and women in Georgian London, but of what they would have called the colonists, so people living in America when it was still part of England. So we have a lady and gentleman walking here, and another image where they're dancing. So you can see the fashions are really similar, but there may be some slight differences. So those are things that you can download if you have a printer, but if you don't, then you can always do drawings just on paper inspired by the things we saw today. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask before we end the session? Hi, Enid.
Hi, and thank you. Thank you for this lesson.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for all your participation, and to everyone who participated in the chat. We were so glad you could join us and meet Miss Polly Hewson as well. That was quite special. And we've got our last family day of the summer next week, next Tuesday at the same time, where we're going to be, it's called Watch It Grow, and we're going to be thinking about Ben Franklin and botany, because he was interested in how you grow plants. And I'm going to be showing you how to make your own flower pot to have at home. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that, and have a great week. Hopefully see you then. Goodbye.